Amongst all species in the known universe, there wasn't one more peaceful than the humans. Of course, there were many races who hated violence and did everything they could to avoid it. But the humans were different. First of all, they were different because, as individuals, they weren't all that peaceful. While not naturally violent either, situations could still get heated, especially if the human was intoxicated. Likewise, they practiced violent sports and even martial arts, all signs of a relatively aggressive species. Yet, on a governmental level, they took pacifism to an absurd degree. For example, they had no war fleet, not even a defensive one. They officially had a military, but what it actually did was anyone's guess. They seemed afraid by the perspective of any conflict, not just the ones they'd have to participate in. It felt they weren't making less effort to prevent them than if the survival of the galaxy was at stake. For example, 13 years ago, they offered the Jarazi Republic great compensation for accepting the demands of the Urtuk Empire. They did that pretty much every time, handing out enormous amounts of money to appease the situation. That would have bankrupted most races, but the humans were very technologically advanced and profit-driven. Their coffers were apparently bottomless. In fact, they could probably destroy entire nations through their economy. Yet they didn't do that either. That was even more suspicious, since they were the oldest race in the galaxy, and while their true capabilities were unknown, they could probably impose their view to anyone. And they were unhappy with a lot of things in the galaxy. Slavers, tax heavens, and brutal conquerors were not rare. Yet, while humanity did act against them, it also felt like they didn't want to look like a genuine threat to them. You'd think that any ambitious conqueror would try to subject humans, as they were seemingly an easy target that would give them the power to subjugate the galaxy. But you'd be mistaken, for two reasons. First, while humanity had never made war before, nobody doubted that pushing them too far could awaken an unstoppable monster, and that was already enough to scare most wannabe galactic emperors. Second, there was something off with humanity's fear of conflict. They had no problem selling weapons to the rest of the galaxy, and were in fact the biggest suppliers of them, despite the somewhat restrictive demand to sign the Geneva Convention to be allowed to buy them. Side convention was not particularly extreme on what it banned, at least by the standards of most species,